everyone recognizes the name Maximilien Robespierre, the relentless architect of the French Revolution, the incorruptible jurist who sent thousands to the guillotine in the name of virtue. But few remember his younger brother, Augustin. They called him Bonbon, a nickname that captured his warmth and charm, his easy laughter, his fondness for cards, good wine, and pretty company. He was everything Maximilien was not, carefree where the elder was austere, impulsive where the elder was disciplined. Yet beneath those differences, the two were bound by something deeper than blood, a faith that France could be reborn through reason and courage. When the first thunder of revolution rolled across Paris, the Robespierre brothers stood shoulder to shoulder. The Bastille had fallen, the king trembled, and the streets seethed with hope. Maximilien, the moral voice of the Jacobins, preached incorruptible justice. Augustin, the younger firebrand, carried that message to the provinces. His speeches lit up town squares, rousing the dispossessed and the young to dream of equality. While his brother debated decrees in the National Convention, Augustin moved among the people, the soldier orator of a new France. Their assent mirrored the Revolution's own fevered climb. The monarchy crumbled. Bred riots gave way to the roar of the Assembly. France, starving, defiant, delirious, stood ready to remake the world. And in the centre of it all the Robespierres rose, their names whispered as twin pillars of virtue. Then came 1793. King Louis XVI mounted the scaffold, his last words swallowed by the drumbeats of the Republic. The guillotine's blade flashed, and with it the old order died. Crowds cheered. Hats flew, cannons thundered in salute. But amid the triumph ran a darker current, a knowledge that once a king's blood had stained the cobblestones, there could be no easy return. Maximilien tightened his grip on principle, demanding purity in all who served the revolution. Augustin, loyal yet uneasy, watched Paris drift toward fanaticism. Still, he followed his brother's path, convinced that the sacrifices were necessary, that liberty's birth must be bought in pain. He could not know that the same blade which claimed a king would one day claim them both. France in 1793 was a country bleeding from every wound. Foreign armies closed in from all sides, royalist insurrections erupted in the countryside, and the revolution devoured its own children in the name of purity. In the midst of this chaos, Augustin Robespierre was dispatched as a representative on mission, a man charged with absolute authority to root out treason and restore revolutionary order. He rode south through dust and famine, through cities trembling between loyalty and rebellion. Wherever he went, his presence struck fear and awe in equal measure. To some, he was the Republic's savior, young, eloquent, incorruptible as his brother. To others, he was the embodiment of tyranny cloaked in virtue. In Toulon, he faced betrayal on a grand scale. The port, France's naval jewel, had surrendered to the British. Augustin, furious, demanded retribution. There he crossed paths with a brilliant, untested artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose ambition blazed even then like a hidden star. Together they planned the city's recapture, and when Toulon fell back into French hands, Augustin sent triumphant letters to Paris, praising Bonaparte's genius. For a brief, flickering moment, it seemed glory had returned to the Robespierre name, but the South was not easily tamed. Every victory brought new accusations, every act of mercy whispered as weakness. Augustin, who had once believed in the revolution's radiant ideals, now saw its shadowed face. The tribunals he presided over filled with men whose only crime was hesitation. The guillotine that stood for justice became an instrument of fear. Reports reached Paris that the younger Robespierre was soft, that he questioned the severity of his brother's decrees. Maximilien, burdened by his own battles within the Convention, wrote back with cold insistence, "Virtue must be defended by terror," and so Augustin obeyed, outwardly loyal, inwardly breaking. He signed death warrants with trembling hands, then stared at the ink as if it might bleed. The revolution he had once adored was now a beast he no longer recognized. By the spring of 1794, Augustin returned to Paris, a man praised by some, suspected by many, and haunted by what he had done in the Republic's name. The summer of 1794 brought a silence more dreadful than war. Bread was scarce, fear hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Even the most ardent revolutionaries began to whisper. When will it end? In the halls of the Convention, Maximilien's once revered voice now struck terror. He spoke of new plots, new traitors, unseen enemies within. The revolution's blade had taken so many that its next victim could be anyone. To the weary deputies, the incorruptible now seemed mad, a priest of death preaching virtue from a pulpit of blood. Augustin watched his brother grow isolated and grim. At night the elder Robespierre wrote alone by candlelight, while Augustin tried to reason with him, pleading for moderation, for mercy, for the humanity they had once sworn to defend. But Maximilien's eyes burned with conviction. He believed himself the guardian of France's soul, even as France turned away in fear. By July the conspiracy was no longer whispered, it was underway. The same men who had once cheered the Robespierres now plotted their downfall. Saint Just warned Maximilien that the convention was slipping beyond their control, but it was too late. On the 9th of Thermidor, year II, July 27, 1794, the hall erupted in fury. When Maximilien rose to speak, his voice was drowned in shouts. Accusations thundered from every side. Tyrant, dictator, down with the monster. He tried to defend himself, but no one listened. Within hours the Robespierres were declared outlaws of the Republic. No trial, no appeal, just the echo of their own revolution turning on them. As the convention's guards closed in, Augustin faced a choice: surrender or die free. He looked once at his brother, pale and silent, then at the open window behind them, and without a word he ran and leapt. The crowd below gasped. He crashed onto the courtyard stones 3 stories down. His body twisted on impact, his face bloodied beyond recognition, his limbs shattered. He was still breathing, barely. When they dragged him away, his only words were a groan that no one understood. That night, as Paris slept uneasy, the Robespierre brothers lay side by side in a makeshift prison cell, one broken by a fall, the other by a bullet to the jaw. They would not see another sunrise. Dawn broke on 10 Thermidor, year II, July 28, 1794. The air above Paris hung heavy and sour, a fog of gunpowder and dread. Within the Hôtel de Ville, the Robespierre brothers lay among their captured allies, silent spectres of the revolution that had consumed them. Maximilien's jaw hung in tatters from the pistol shot that had silenced him. Augustin lay beside him, his body mangled from the leap, his breathing shallow and uneven. Around them soldiers whispered, unsure whether to fear or pity these fallen idols. When the carts arrived, the condemned were hauled up like bundles of rags. Augustin's head lolled to one side, his right leg was bent the wrong way, bone pressing through flesh. Yet he remained conscious, his eyes wide, his jaw clenched against a scream. The younger Robespierre, who once strode through Toulon like a conquering hero, now stared at the cobblestones, his lips moving in prayer or delirium. The procession moved through the streets toward the Place de la Révolution, a river of faces following in grim fascination. Crowds pressed close, the same people who had once cheered his victories. Children shouted insults, women threw scraps of bread, but some, those who remembered the brothers' ideals, looked away, unable to meet his gaze. At the scaffold's base, executioners lifted Augustin from the cart. His body, broken beyond repair, sagged between them. One hand still clutched the torn remnants of his coat, the other hung limp. He tried to stand, but the effort only tore a groan from his chest. The crowd fell silent. They placed him on the plank, face turned toward the sky he could barely see through pain. The blade rose, glinting in the afternoon sun. For a fleeting moment he thought of Maximilien, his brilliant, doomed brother somewhere behind him in the line, and then the world narrowed to light, wind and steel. The guillotine fell. When it was over, the square erupted in wild relief. The monster was dead, they said. The Republic was free again, but among the blood and sawdust lay more than tyrants. It was the death of conviction itself, the idea that virtue could be enforced by terror, that reason could rule without mercy. That night, the bodies of the Robespierre brothers were thrown into a common pit at the Erancis cemetery. Quicklime poured over them to hasten decay. The revolution, which had demanded purity, now buried its own apostles in silence. The day after the executions, Paris seemed to exhale at last. The fear that had gripped the city for 2 years dissolved into a strange, hollow quiet. For some, it felt like deliverance. For others, it was grief mixed with guilt, a realization that the revolution had devoured its most faithful believers. The corpses of Maximilien, Augustin, and their companions lay piled in the lime pit at Erancis, nameless beneath the chalky soil. But the fascination with their deaths did not fade. Officials, doctors, and curious citizens whispered about what had really happened that final night, about the fall from the window, the bullet to the jaw, the shattered bones, and the final moments of the men who once ruled France through terror. When the body of Augustin Robespierre was examined, the truth was both clinical and cruel. The fall had crushed him. His spine was splintered, his pelvis fractured in multiple places, and fragments of bone had pierced the soft tissue around his lungs. His skull showed bruising from impact, his limbs twisted by the force of the landing. Yet there were no signs of a clean, fatal blow, only the slow ruin of the body. He had not died instantly. The young Robespierre had lived for nearly 24 hours after the fall, fully conscious, enduring every moment of agony until the guillotine ended what the stones had begun. Doctors noted the irony. The man who had once signed death warrants with mechanical precision now met death by degrees, a body collapsing inward, nerve by nerve, as if punished by the very laws of nature he had once tried to control through politics. For Maximilien, the autopsy told a different story. A bullet had shattered his jaw and lodged near the base of his neck. He had lost the power to speak, fitting, some said, for the man whose voice had ruled a nation. When the executioner tore away the bandage from his face before the blade fell, a scream erupted, raw and animal, echoing over the square. The sound haunted witnesses for years. As the lime pit hissed and smoked, France began its slow return to sanity. The prisons emptied, the guillotines fell silent, and the word virtue lost its luster. The revolution had devoured the dreamers and left only survivors, those who learned that purity is a dangerous god. In the decades that followed, history remembered Maximilien as the tyrant, the incorruptible fanatic. Augustin faded into a footnote, a charming youth destroyed by loyalty and faith in his brother's vision. But those who studied their final hours saw something more complex. They saw two men who believed utterly in justice and enlightenment, and who were undone not by corruption, but by conviction carried too far. In the end, Augustin Robespierre was not the villain nor the hero. He was the revolution's mirror, reflecting its hope, its courage, and its terrible cost. His broken body, examined in the cold light of reason, told the truth better than any speech, that even the most radiant ideals, when pressed without mercy, will collapse under their own weight.